Hey all, Ryan here. I'm currently dealing with a bout of COVID, so my voice isn't up to snuff for recording purposes, hence the text-to-speech use here for this script. I got hugely inspired to write this, and I didn't want to wait forever to get this video out since I already have 2 other massive videos that are in the works. Okay, I know a few of you are looking at that title and going, okay, time to fucking end this guy's whole career. What does he even mean, new shared universe? Listen, I had to make the title something snappy to get your attention, eh? I'll explain what I mean in just a second. First, I gotta bring the rest of the crowd up to the table. Hold here a moment. Howdy everyone. Stephen King, eh? So, for those of you that aren't aware, games aren't my only passion. I've as much talked about books I've written a bit on this channel, but what about books I've read? Well, as the title might suggest, I'm a pretty big fan of Stephen King's works, and it'd be a whole nother video if I were going to sit here and give you recommendations, but I'm going to sneak one in anyway. It's Revival Go Red Revival. Stephen King's books are known for quite a few characteristics. Now everybody, let's say them out loud so we're all on the same page. Scary blue chambray work shirts and connecting to the magnum opus series Dark Tower. Okay, so I know this is a bit of a known thing in the deeper community and it's become more common knowledge the last few years, but I think it'll be some years yet until we consider this true common knowledge. But a large majority of Stephen King's works are connected. This much is known, but that these connections all stem toward a 7-ish book series King wrote called The Dark Tower. Now, this is not going to be a series talking about this series, as this video would be much too short for that to handle. Now, because of the nature of this video, many Stephen King books plots are going to be talked about here, and I am going to assume you have either read them or have prowled on their Wikipedia entry because you were interested but didn't have time to read them. Lots of common elements people point to for very surface level connections are, say, the fact that a relative of the creature from IT appears in the final book, The Dark Tower, named Dandolo. Patrick Danville from King's novel, Insomnia, also appears in this novel near the very end. Book 5 of the Dark Tower series is a shadow sequel to Salem's Lot with Father Callahan in a major role. So on and so forth to the beam says ye. So, cool, you have a lot of connections to about 30 years of writing history, as the final Dark Tower novel chronologically was released in late 2004. For the purposes of this video, I am not going to be talking about The Wind Through the Keyhole, as that is very obviously just another Dark Tower book, having released after the end of the series, but since then Stephen King has not stopped writing novels and short stories. But, you may ask, do any of these new books connect back to the tower? Are they any good? Well, the second question I'm not going to be any help on. The numerous good reviews and high sales can do that for you, but I can try to help with the first one, and even if books don't directly connect back to the tower, I can discuss how they may tie into one another, which would then also tie back into the tower considering the nature of it all. With that said and the preamble out of the gates, we're going to start with the first book on this list, 11/22/63. Now, this isn't the first book King's written after The Dark Tower, nor is it the first with connections back, but I wanted this video to be fully within my experience, and truth be told I still haven't read every King book out there yet, so I'm skipping ahead a few years to books I want to talk about further. So, 11/22/63 was published on the 8th of November 2011, a full 7 years after the end of Dark Tower as a story. This story is that of an English teacher named Jake Epping who finds a portal into the past by way of a friend of his that owns the local diner, Al Templeton. The portal spits whoever enters out at the 8th of September 1958, no matter how many times they return to the present. They of course retain the knowledge they gain and age, as Al shows Jake as he seems to have aged decades in a matter of days, but Al tasks Jake with the ultimate plan, going back and staying in the past to prevent the assassination of John F. Kennedy, hence the title of the book, as this is the date he is killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. The story is part historical thriller, part time travel story, and part hometown love story. All in all, I think it is a really great read for all of the above, but that's not what we're here for today, ladies, gents, and non-binary friends. So of our two categories here we have directly connected to the tower, and connected to other books which are connected to the tower. 11/22/63 here is promptly in the second book here, but there's a little dash of the former as we get into it. Now, there are plenty of occurrences of the number 19, which is a very resonant number in Dark Tower terms, as it is revealed that it accompanies one of the world's nexus points for which all else exists off of, dubbed the Keystone World. The world that which Stephen King as a character himself writes the stories exists in the Keystone, and 19 is a strong symbol that the story you are reading takes place in the Keystone World. What's so special about the Keystone World, outside of that I already described? Well, it's a world where time cannot revert, where mistakes cannot be fixed, where time moves only in one direction. Something we see directly not happening in this novel, so we know 11/22/63 is not a Keystone novel, but we also would know that based on the car that appears in the new timeline created near the end of the novel. Jake comes across a car known as a Takuro Spirit, which is a fictional Japanese automobile that previously only appeared in the fourth Dark Tower novel, Wizards and Glass, while the party arrives in an alternate version of Topeka, Kansas that eerily mirrors the events of The Stand. Are You Still With Me? But here they see a Takuro Spirit as well, confirming at the very least that the events of The Stand also do not take place in the Keystone World. I hope that was obvious, but based on recent events, maybe not. Anyway, the final large connection this novel has to others is that Jake actually visits Derry, Maine, on one of his trips through the past. For those of the alert variety, Derry is the fictional town of Maine that featured most prominently in IT. And, what? You know, but Jake actually meets up with Beverly Marsh and Richie Tozier, Beep Beep Richie, to help with a little quest he's on regarding an old colleague of his. Though it does have to be said that this is notably an alternate universe version of the gang we see in IT, obviously again as this entire novel is shown to be outside of the Keystone World. There are two things of note with this meetup, though. First, is that Beverly, knowing that there's something special about Jake, asks if he knows about the turtle. This is a reference to Hankerin, the turtle that Bill Denbrough calls for assistance to at the end of IT, when performing the ritual of Chud. Hankerin is also one of the 12 guardians of the beams holding up the Dark Tower itself, so Beverly mentioning it here assumes that instead of Bill taking the lead role in this timeline, perhaps it was her who led the rest in their ritual of Chud. On a more unfortunate level of reference is something that Jake himself notices. I can tell you one more thing, there was something inside that fallen chimney at the Kitchener Ironworks. I don't know what and I don't want to know, but at the mouth of the thing I saw a heap of gnawed bones and a tiny chewed collar with a bell on it. A collar that had surely belonged to some child's beloved kitten. And from inside the pipe, deep in that oversized bore, something moved and shuffled. Come in and see, that something seemed to whisper in my head. Never mind all the rest of it, Jake, come in and see. Come in and visit. Time doesn't matter in here, time just floats away. You know you want to, you know you're curious. Maybe it's even another rabbit hole. Another portal. Maybe it was, but I don't think so. I think it was Derry in there, everything that was wrong with it, everything that was askew, hiding in that pipe. Hibernating. Letting people believe the bad times were over, waiting for them to relax and forget there had ever been bad times at all. I left in a hurry, and to that part of Derry I never went back. So, yeah, Jake encountered IT, and that means that this version of the Losers Club are not yet finished with their fight, even if Jake is able to get away from it to focus on his own issues. Next up on our list is one that is going to be full of connections to the Kingverse, and I'm not even going to tell you the title before I slap it onto the Connected to Other King Books column, as this is Dr. Sleep, the direct sequel to The Shining. Now, honestly, The Shining is one of those novels that is just so dilyly intertwined with the Tower's events that honestly I would have to dive in deep and talk about every minute detail and how much lines up. And then I would have to argue on the merits of the book versus the movie, which brings up a whole nother can of worms we can't get into in this video. But my answer for that specific can of worms is to watch the movie directed by Mike Flanagan, because who boy is this a name you want to keep an eye on, as it relates to Stephen King. Anyway, Dr. Sleep goes as follows. Dan Torrance, haunted by the horrors of his past at the Overlook Hotel and battling alcoholism, finds solace shattered when he encounters Abra, a gifted teenager who shares his extraordinary psychic abilities known as the Shine. United by their uncommon bond, they forge an unexpected partnership to confront the True Knot, a malevolent cult determined to sustain their immortality by exploiting the innocence of those who possess the Shine. Now tying it back, the True Knot are a set of psychic vampires, as it were, that feed not on blood, but on the ability to shine, as Danny Torrance puts it. They are somewhat similar to the Cantioi from Dark Tower, who harness psychic children to use them as breakers against the Tower. Of course, other Dark Tower-esque phrases are directly quoted in this novel. Life is a wheel. There are other worlds than these. But for Dr. Sleep specifically, I am going to bring up the movie because it was helmed by Mike Flanagan, and why that is will be made apparent in due time. But Flanagan is a very noted fan of the Journey to the Tower, and in the movie he added a whole bunch more references than ever existed in the original material. First, the balloon animals here in Abra's room spell out Ka. Ka in Dark Tower is the physical essence that most closely resembles fate or destiny. In literal fashion though, it is the will of Gan, the being that created the universe and from its own navel spun the Dark Tower into creation. Ka is not a plan, but is a sort of guiding force that urges those along their fated paths. Ka is the force urging Roland of Gilead along to the Dark Tower, and Ka is that which draws Danny Torrance back to the halls of the Overlook Hotel, deathplace of many including his own father.
More. Why are you here?
I'm here because it all comes round. Car's a wheel, Doc.
Real quick, next up is the name of the bus company that Danny rides into Frasier, Tet Transportation. Tet is also from Dark Tower, as in the Ka Tet, or Tet Corporation. The main group identifies under Tet means group, or collective, typically paired with Ka as I did before, so fated gathering or destined group of important individuals. Very fitting if we're slotting Ka here into Abra's room, of which she definitely has that power, then it makes sense that the very vehicle bringing Danny closer to his destiny, his new Tet as it were, would be named this. Also, the young child who is a victim of the True Knot early in the story that is the crux of Abra signaling out to Danny, the baseball boy, as it were, is involved in two Dark Tower references. Here, he is shown to be number 19, signaling that this story, and that of The Shining, take place within the Keystone world, but also that the sign nearby where said baseball boy is devoured, we can see a sign from a company in the background, Larmerk Industries, a company within Dark Tower known for creating the cybernetic versions of the Tower's Bin Guardians, at the very least the Bear, Shardik. Also, since I'm not going to get to share this anywhere else, but Dick Halloran, from The Shining appears in this novel as a sort of shine ghost, if I'm going to make the Star Wars comparison here to Danny, and in the movie he's the one that says the Dark Tower quote here. Of note, Halloran also appeared in IT, in a backstory of one of the previous cycles of the creature's hauntings of Derry, specifically that of a restaurant, and also notably this story, and most likely more is going to be the centerpiece tale of the HBO IT prequel show that is going to be coming out soon, Welcome to Derry. Oh, also, Abra canonically likes a fictional band by the name of Round Here. Trust me on this one, I'll bring it back up in a second. With that said though, I think we're ready to move onward to the next book on our hit list. It is a novel that grew to be a quick favorite of mine, Mr. Mercedes. This was a different step for King, being a crime novel, and less focused on the thriller aspect of horror and more the psychoanalytical, as it does feature gruesome murders. Specifically that caused by one Brady Hartsfield. Brady is your typical white mid to late 20s loner sociopath who finds joy in ramming a Mercedes, the effective symbol of the American dream, right through a lot of prospective hopefuls at a job fair, killing 8 and severely injuring many others. The story goes into the time after this killing where Brady was able to evade being caught, and chooses to antagonize the now retired lead detective on the case, Bill Hodges. Of course, as these things go, the killer can't wait but to be found out. As it goes, they long for it, they say, and the chase, as they say, is on. What's important here though is I bring up that along the way, the cousin of the woman whose Mercedes was stolen in that original attack, Holly Gibney, is going to become one of the most important characters of the Kingverse moving forward. But first, we're going to stick Mr. Mercedes here into the connects to the Dark Tower, but it by itself is probably going to be the least connected, at least until we hook some more stuff up to it. Holly Gibney is, I would say, probably one of the most canon Stephen King characters, period. Or at least in a very long time. He's gone on record during an NPR interview as stating, "I just love Holly, and I wish she were a real person. She just walked on in the first book she was in, Mr. Mercedes, and she more or less stole the book, and she stole my heart." Holly is a very observant character, but also when we first meet her, she's very much under the control of her elderly mother, Charlotte. With little backbone of her own, it isn't until she meets Detective Hodges and Jerome that she starts to come out of her shell and truly becomes a force to be reckoned with. Without giving too much away, Holly is going to be a character to keep an eye on over the coming novels and works, but here in this book, we mainly see her meeting the group and growth to becoming more confident in herself. But I mean, if you need proof of that growth, when Brady Hartsfield is trying a last-ditch effort to blow up a concert of the fictional boy band, Holly manages to completely knock Sock silly with a sock loaded up with ball bearings given to her by Hodges himself. Oh, and that boy band's name, Round Here, hey now, that's sounding more familiar. And it confirms that this story takes place within the same Keystone world as The Shining, IT, and Dr. Sleep, among others. For some lighter Dark Tower nods come in the form of the username Brady sends to Hodges for a login to a website called Under Debbie's Blue Umbrella, a self-made chat website Hartsfield used to taunt his victims into killing themselves. Hodges' username is KermitFrog19, and we can forget the beginning because one bam thank you ma'am, we've seen another 19. 19 spotted, let's go. Also of note, there was a show made for the Mr. Mercedes trilogy and it's also really good, you should watch that if available. Another Dark Tower mention is in the password given as when they're trying to get into Holly's cousin, Olivia's computer for more information on Brady's relationship with her before her suicide, the password suggested is Otrelore19. Obvious 19 reference here, but there are also some alternate hints. So the Otrelore comes from Olivia Trelawney, but as it is here can also be seen as an anagram of two important things. Lar Tower and Walter O. The first is pretty self-explanatory, and the second comes from the secondary antagonist of the Dark Tower series and the primary antagonist in, well, several other King stories. The Stand, The Eye of the Dragon, Call Him What You Want, Randall Flagg, Walter Paddock, Walter O'Dim, it all leads to the same dark existence. Now, this isn't confirming that Miss Trelawney is the born-again demon we love to hate to see, but a nice nod and again confirmation we're still in this singular time and world here where time only moves but forward. Also of note, not directly confirmed, but can be implied through subtext, Hodges, Jerome and Holly make up their own sort of K-A-tet that reflects Roland's K-A-tet through the book series, and Holly herself seems to have premonitions of some sort that signal bad tides coming, and Hodges, while not a traditional gunslinger of Gilead, does have the knack a gunslinger would with his skills as an ex-detective. Next up on the chopping block and similarly going to be put in the connected to other King books column is Finders Keepers, the second book in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. Or if you're watching the show, the third season. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure why they did this one out of order, but now you know. The book is about the murder of reclusive writer John Rothstein, an amalgamation of John Updike, Philip Roth, and J.D. Salinger, his missing notebooks, and the release of his killer from prison after 35 years as the new private detective agency helmed by Hodges and Holly Gibney after the end of the last book are drawn into the mix alongside a young boy, Peter Storber, who finds the missing manuscripts and tries to use them to turn his family's poor fortune. This book itself is pretty light on the specific references to the tower, but one of note is that of the hospital room of one comatose Brady Hartsfield, room 217, the same room of the haunted hotel room of the Overlook Hotel, which, by itself, is another connection to 19, as 2 plus 17 equals 19. The third and final Hodges novel is titled End of Watch, which interestingly was originally titled The Suicide Prince, but changed near the end of publication. End of Watch refers to a police officer who is killed in the line of duty, which reveals the inevitable fate of Hodges at the end of this novel, although it is on his own terms due to his terminal illness, and not due to the exploits of Brady Hartsfield, using his newly discovered psychic abilities and possession powers combined with the experimental drugs pumped in him by Dr. Babineo. This novel sees the return of Brady Hartsfield, as we do get a bit of a connection to the Dark Tower verse, as Brady for the most of this novel is within what is known as a dogan, or a sort of palace within the mind, just barely outside the control of one's own body. We saw Susanna in this situation in the Song of Susanna, and it's described in quite a few other Dark Tower novels as well. Now, before we take a look at some of Holly Gibney's other adventures in the Kingverse, we're going to take a quick detour to Revival. This is my favorite standalone Stephen King book, and it has quite a few references to the Dark Tower series as a whole. In Stephen King's Revival, Jamie Morton, a young boy, forms a bond with the charismatic Reverend Charles Jacobs. After tragedy strikes, they reunite years later, with Jacobs pursuing dangerous experiments involving electricity and the afterlife. As Jamie is drawn into Jacobs' obsession, a series of horrifying events unfold, challenging their beliefs and blurring the line between life and death. The novel explores the consequences of tampering with the unknown and the dark side of human ambition. Now, it can be theorized that the electricity that Reverend Jacobs is tapping into is not just some spiritual divine energy, but actually that of the beams themselves, as you /Sergio0831 on Reddit theorizes, and even goes on further to suggest that the null as seen in the story might be a level of the tower closer to the darkness, which honestly keeps the dark nature of this afterlife while also keeping it connecting to the Keystone world. Oh, also, I guess I should also mention that the band that Jamie Morton is involved in as a kid is first called the Gunslingers and then it is changed to the Chrome Roses. I mean, of course it was. Next up on our outing is The Outsider, which once again is most closely related to other King works, notably being the Bill Hodges trilogy. This story is another crime fiction that is set in a small Georgia town. It follows the investigation of the horrific murder of a young boy. Detective Ralph Anderson arrests Terry Maitland, the local high school baseball coach, after overwhelming physical evidence connects him to the crime, yet strangely enough there is also seemingly a rock-solid alibi keeping him away from the time of the crime. Now, I know this doesn't sound like it connects deeply to the Hodges trilogy, but that's because I have not yet revealed that halfway through the novel enters one Holly Gibney, firmly establishing this as within the same continuity. Now, the real interesting connection here is in the eponymous outsider. It's not directly given a name that sticks throughout the book, but it is revealed that it is an otherworldly entity that can shape-shift into people's personages by absorbing their blood. It preys on the fear and chaos of the community, so in that regard I would hazard a guess to say that the outsider is probably similar to both the creature from IT and Dandelo from Dark Tower. I would say probably in the same species ballpark if you will. It is of note that when Holly brains the being in the book's climax, its body begins to disintegrate, leaving worm-like creatures in its stead, probably implying it's the weakest physically of the creatures, as it realistically was only barely tethering itself to this existence. Now, what's interesting is the end of the novel seems to play loose with the idea that the protagonist of the novel, Ralph Anderson, may have maybe gotten infected by the outsider's maggots during the final confrontation. 2, albeit short, chapters seeming to go back and forth of Ralph's paranoia if any of them touched him, nightmares ensuing of them taking over his flesh. Now, there was also an adaptation for this book over on HBO, but it is unconnected to the adaptation of the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, and the Holly they cast for this show is not the same actress they cast for that show. I want to make it clear that this is a good adaptation of this singular standalone story and I'd say is worth watching, but there are notable changes from the source material and is not a good adaptation of this story in context of Stephen King's catalogue. Also, of note, that end stinger that not happened with Ralph at the end of the book happens to Holly in the show, and it's not vague, it's pretty easily spelled out that Holly got infected. An interesting idea, but this isn't getting followed up on at all. What is getting followed up on is the canon story of Holly Gibney, which continues in the short story called If It Bleeds. This story was featured in a short story collection titled after this story, It is one of 4 and is the only one from this collection I'll be talking about here in depth. But if you are interested, Mr. Harrigan's Phone is a good one and is also a Netflix movie starring the actor who played the young Bill Denbrough from the newer It movies. I also recommend The Life of Chuck from this collection. It's probably my favorite from the collection for how uniquely it's told, and the final story, Rat, is pretty good too. I want to make a quick detour to mention that I just learned while researching for this video that The Life of Chuck is also being made into a movie being helmed by Mike Flanagan, no less. Holy fuck, this man is manning infinite projects. Also, it's going to be starring Tom Hiddleston and Mark Hamill. How am I just finding out about this? If It Bleeds stars Holly Gibney as the primary protagonist, owner of the Finders Keepers detective agency, as sees footage of a horrific school bombing on TV. She suspects that there is something odd about the reporter Ondowski who was first on the scene and that he may be a supernatural outsider. Holly makes contact with an elderly former policeman who believes that the reporter feeds on the fear of traumatic emotions, and Holly realizes that Ondowski must be stopped. She, Barbara, and Jerome must all work together to take down Ondowski. Sure enough, this being ends up being a similar sort of being to The Outsider, Dandolo et al. One note I want to mention is that in the beginning of If It Bleeds, Holly is watching a courtroom reality TV show called John Law, which features the eponymous John Law tackling civil and criminal cases a la something like Judge Judy or the People's Court. This is a fictional show and is important because it ties into our next story, the shorter than most novel, Later. Launching in 2021, this is the story of the son of a struggling single mother, Jamie. Conklin just wants an ordinary childhood. But Jamie is no ordinary child. Born with an unnatural ability his mom urges him to keep secret, Jamie can see what no one else can see and learn what no one else can learn. But the cost of using this ability is higher than Jamie can imagine, as he discovers when an NYPD detective draws him into the pursuit of a killer who has threatened to strike from beyond the grave. Essentially, Jamie has the ability to see the ghosts of deceased folk and can even ask them questions, and things soon go off the rails from there. There are massive connections to the wider King-verse in this novel. Let's break it down one by one. So, we canonically see a return of the Deadlights from IT, aka the Force, or a force behind the creature's true form from IT, and Jamie even establishes a ritual of Chud with it, detailing it even further as being a promise between the parties that they will meet in combat, and one side will lose. Looking back, we can even extrapolate a scene from The Wastelands with Susanna performing a ritual of Chud as the Kaetet are pulling Jake through the door, as Reddit user u/Slauky11 mentions. What's even cooler is the Deadlights themselves get more lore as they are confirmed as the evil force that exists within the dead and houses the evil that exists and inhabit people, which ties in a fuckton of previous King stories, but also ties back to stories like Insomnia. IT, of course, could be the apt descriptor for Brady Hartsfield from the Hodges trilogy, but as well as the evil force in typically unconnected novels like Pet Sematary. Later is of course in the Keystone world because of the 19 connections that drop early in the novel, but also because that TV program of John Law Holly was watching in If It Bleeds also appears in a small cameo in this text. Next up on our reading list is Billy Summers. I consider this book the anti-11/22/63, as it is very similar in scope but a mirror image of sorts of inserting oneself into a small community in order to cause a historically significant action, instead of preventing one. Billy Summers is an ex-Marine sniper who is taking one last paid hit job until things obviously go off the rails. Now, this novel is interesting in the fact that for the most part it is largely unconnected to anything else by way of story, but then right near the end of the novel the main character Billy and another character Alice end up near Sidewinder, the fictional town that housed the Overlook Hotel, and here they come across its remains. This firmly places this novel in the Keystone world. There are quite a few 19 placements through the book in addresses, 19 Skyline Drive, 658 Pearson, etc. Before we move on to Fairy Tale, I need to bring up the Institute, mainly because I forgot it in my list here. Oops. On the surface this seems to be a direct connection to Wolves of the Callar, as the Institute itself seems to be a sort of real-world mirror version of the Breakers assaulting the Beam, but as far as I can remember there isn't anything under the surface that furthers this connection deeper. From what I remember there are surface-level references to your classic Stephen King works, so it's likely a part of the Keystone world, as all these kids have the shine, as Danny Torrance would say it, but nothing really further than that to discuss. Now moving on to Fairy Tale, this is mightily big a mid-world story if any. Honestly, like how Billy Summers was a mirror image of 11/22/63, I feel like this novel is a sort of mirror image and combination of Mr. Harrigan's Phone, 11/22/63, and The Talisman, the collaboration novel between Stephen King and Peter Straub, which also is 100% a Dark Tower connected novel, where instead of leaving our young scrappy protagonist an old cell phone connected to the afterlife of Mr. Harrigan's will, Mr. Howard Bowditch leaves Charlie Reed the keys to a portal to another world, the kingdom of Empus, which is suffering from a curse called the Grey. There are quite a lot of nods to Dark Tower in this book, the idea of twinners with Christopher Polly and Peterkin, the short story that inspired the Dark Tower series. Child Roland to the Dark Tower is directly name-dropped, Charlie's father directly, quoting long days and pleasant nights, plenty of direct quotes from Eddie Dean. The likeliest possibility that Gogmagog is a creature that originated from the To Darkness. Oh, and also the fact that the gun that Mr. Bowditch owned and that Charlie goes on to carry throughout Empus is the same type that a gunslinger would, a .45 caliber 6-shot revolver. And if you weren't convinced, we even get a drop of the iconic Dark Tower line, "There are other worlds than this." It's not directly confirmed, but it also seems likely that the sundial that which controls time in Empus seems to be this world's version of the tower itself, as it predates both the city and the palace, and of course the glimmering Emerald City that Charlie sees as he first visits Empus is a smack-dab recreation of the Emerald City of Ounce the Kaetet sees when they learn of the wizard spheres. Also, of note, the curse afflicting the world known as the Grey is very interesting because Charlie himself throughout the story seems to own up to the fact that he's not fully acted as a soldier of the White, or otherwise good force, talking a lot about his past and how he wasn't always as kind or as good as he would have liked to be. A gunslinger of White with a little bit of black splashed onto his past would make him a gunslinger of the Grey, a neat little connection. Reddit's also got some other neat details in here, as Daytimer suggests that Empus main city could be a primitive version of the city that would eventually become Lud, as the trolleys would eventually become Monos, the gold statue could be of Charlie, and the underground passageways all throughout the city, but there's nothing directly confirming this. Finally, is the novel that is going to be releasing in November 2023, titled Holly. This is a full-length novel starring Holly Gibney, and honestly, it's super nice seeing her star in a full-length novel. Down below is the current synopsis. When Penny Doll calls the Finders Keepers detective agency hoping for help locating her missing daughter, Holly is reluctant to accept the case. Her partner, Pete, has COVID. Her, very complicated, mother has just died, and Holly is meant to be on leave. But something in Penny Doll's desperate voice makes it impossible for Holly to turn her down. Mere blocks from where Bonnie Doll disappeared live professors Rodney and Emily Harris. They are the picture of bourgeois respectability, married octogenarians, devoted to each other, and semi-retired lifelong academics. But they are harboring an unholy secret in the basement of their well-kept, book-lined home, one that may be related to Bonnie's disappearance. And it will prove nearly impossible to discover what they are up to. They are savvy, they are patient, and they are ruthless. Holly must summon all her formidable talents to outthink and outmaneuver the shockingly twisted professors in this chilling new masterwork from Stephen King. All in all, obviously this is going to slot in nicely with Holly's inclusion, so anything else that appears in this book will just be the extra cherry on top. And if you wanted even more of the tower, we finally have confirmation that Mike Flanagan, the absolute monster of a madman, is working on a television adaptation of The Dark Tower, something he's gone on record numerous times as stating as the project he wanted to work on the most. He has also gone on record stating he envisions this project as a 5-season show that has each season of the show cover one of the first 5 Dark Tower books, with the last 2 books, Song of Susanna and The Dark Tower, comprising feature-length films. Of course these are pre-production plans, so they are subject to change, but honestly this sounds like a dream come true. Basically, if you like Stephen King stories, you have 2 people to keep an eye on, Stephen King himself, and Mike Flanagan, because this man cannot miss. And that is all we have for now for the books I wanted to talk about. Of course, there are so many more stories that connect to the Dark Tower, like The Talisman I mentioned and its sequel The Black House, or the Gwendy's trilogy of collaborations King did with Richard Chisma, and literally everything he wrote before he finished The Dark Tower, but I wanted to shine a light on the connections to the tower that have come out in the last decade, as in the inner community I feel there's not as much focused discussion, at least on the level of pre-Tower King. Have any more connections to share? Find something in a novel I didn't talk about. Find something in a novel I did. Fire off in the comments down below, and I'd love to hear what you think. And like this video if you've learned something new today, and subscribe if you want to see more like it. Check you guys next time.